from Qatar. When one looks at the employment question in the two economies, it's a very different employment question, one from the other. And so, recognizing in a sense what your assets are in terms of population size, physical area, access to global markets are important in defining the focus of the strategy. So we said the public sector, we believe, is essential. It's a critical element of this, and it's going to be a large partner in the effort. But you need an efficiency test, and we basically thought of two. The first is obviously the global market. The global market creates the opportunities, but it also creates an efficiency criterion. If you can compete globally, either against imports or as an exporter, you have to some extent demonstrated the capabilities, which are the types of capabilities that we think are desirable from the point of view of why we want to diversify in the first place. But there's also a cost test, or an efficiency test, if you will. At what cost does that competitiveness come to the society? We all know circumstances, both in this region and certainly globally, even within a WTO-friendly environment of countries that have excessively subsidized activities in order to make them globally competitive. In cases where those activities have grown up, the question is, was the initial sacrifice worth the subsequent flow of benefits? In cases where they haven't grown up, there's an obvious answer, which is no. But in each case, there has to be put within this framework a fairly rigorous set of cost-benefit criteria. We can achieve diversification, but at what cost? And what does it mean? First, it means being globally competitive. Secondly, it means being globally competitive at reasonable cost, both to the private sector and to the public sector. Capabilities and constraints. What are they? What's kept the diversification process from happening? We had a fairly lively debate on the macro environment. And I'm not sure if I could argue that we had a consensus on the extent to which that is, in a sense, relevant or determinant in this. But I think we all at least share a view, which is that one has to recognize that appropriate management of the macroeconomy is essential in order to create an enabling environment, as one of the elements of an enabling environment for private economic activity. Beyond that, though, I suppose the one thing that we would add in terms of enabling environment is, let us not be deceived by some of the league tables. The countries of the region are doing reasonably well in terms of the global league tables, whether it's the World Competitiveness Report or whether it's doing business. But beyond the stroke of the pen changes or the legislative changes to regulations, to administrative procedures, there's a question of the attitude of the public administration of the private sector. And there was a sense, I think, around the table that more effort needs to be expended to be sure that everyone within the economies of the Gulf understands that if the enabling environment is to be private sector and market friendly, it's not just about the rules, it's also about how the rules are applied. And looking more deeply at that and getting feedback from the private sector on how that works is important. Skills, education, and knowledge, a very large area that we've identified. And here, a point that I think is important, and again, something we didn't talk about much yesterday. There's a tendency in these discussions to focus at the very top end. What's happening with the universities? What's happening with the knowledge parks? What's happening with R&D? But the base of the education pyramid, primary education, secondary education, making sure that those curricula are aligned to what are perceived as the emerging needs of a diversifying economy, improving the quality of education at that level, and making sure that every child in the GCC who leaves with a secondary degree or a technical degree actually comes equipped with the skills that can help make these societies competitive is important. So while having a new university that comes from New York or from Washington, D.C. or from California is critical and important, making sure that the primary school teachers are well equipped is also critical and important. And having a balance in the education strategy, we felt was something to flag in terms of addressing the constraint of skills and knowledge. Infrastructure, where and when? It's become routine in these conversations to talk about the need for infrastructure, the infrastructure constraint. But we also all recognize that relative to much of the rest of the world, including the OECD, the countries of the GCC are reasonably well endowed with infrastructure. But there was a sense among our group that Again, trying to think strategically and focus. If the objective is to create an environment in which new global competitive firms can both find a niche, grow, and extend into a value chain, perhaps the sequencing of those investments and the focus of those investments needs to be re-examined. So we're giving company prescriptions in terms of what it should be, but if one's thinking then in terms of an outward-oriented, high-value-added strategy, where should the infrastructure be? When should the investments be made? How long will they take to come online? Or perhaps more important questions to ask them, do we have enough infrastructure? Is it the right sort? Is it in the right place? Is it at the right time? Finally, we turn to the question of SMEs. It's an area that every economy, at least that I know of in the GCC, is trying to grapple with, certainly trying to grapple with here. Do they face special constraints beyond these constraints? And the answer, I think, at least we came to were at least two. One is in the area of financial markets. Access to finance, the role of collateral, the role of project-based banking, venture capital. These are all areas that we felt need some much further and deeper examination to ask whether or not a small firm or an entrepreneurial firm has the same access to the financial sector and the same ability to find financial capital as some of its larger competitors. And the question of skills beyond the basic skills, that if you will, the entrepreneurial skills, the ability of an entrepreneur to identify themselves. And a very important question, where are the incentives for someone with a bright entrepreneurial idea to leave the comfort of a regularly paid job and take the risks of becoming a private businessman? That's not something that can be entirely solved, obviously, with skills development. But at least by thinking about the kinds of skills that you would need to go from being an administrator to being a business person, there may be a range of development, skills